Okay, I was recently asked in one of my videos, or in one of the comments, about arrow spine. Okay, and since I'm working on an arrow right now, this is the one I'm working on. I mentioned spine during the construction, uh, and I mentioned like this one here is about 65 pounds, I think. Anyway, when you go from this to the final product, this, you need to be concerned with spine, okay, to duplicate this arrow. Now, before I get too complicated, I'm just going to give you my basic definition of spine and try to keep this video as short as possible, if I can. Okay. For me, spine is a measure of deflection, or it could be considered stiffness or flexibility, however you want to look at it, of the arrow shaft. You know, stiffness or flexibility of the arrow shaft. Okay. Now, this measure of deflection is just fancy talk for how much it actually bends under stress. Okay. So, how much it actually bends when I put stress on it. That little distance. Let's say I put 2 pounds on it, like a modern spine tester. Put 2 pounds and it flexes. That little distance that it flexes is what's called the spine. All right. It's a measure of the deflection, measure of that bending movement, okay? And it's translated into poundage so that it's easily matched to a bow. Okay, so if it's a 55-pound spine, supposedly that arrow is matched to a 55-pound draw bow. Okay, that's how it works. That's how modern archers view spine in simple terms. Okay, now I just watched a video on a Korean arrow maker to see how they deal with spine and other things, and I watched the whole thing twice, and there's not a single mention of spine at all in the traditional Korean archery video, which is kind of curious. But there is a lot of weighing of the shaft going on. Okay, and then he was using bamboo. All right, so with some woods and some materials, the weight can correspond to the spine. All right, if it's consistent. So that's what he was doing there. It's kind of an indirect way of looking at how stiff it will be when you weigh it. That there is a correlation between the weight and the spine when you know all your material is consistent. Okay, so that's why I think that's why they weren't measuring spine. Now, in modern terms, or in the modern archery, a lot of people get caught up in discussions of arrow spine. All right, and they get into something called an archer's paradox, or they try to define something called an archer's paradox. And I'm not a big fan of that particular term. I have my own definition here. An archer's paradox, one example, is when an archer sounds smart explaining spine, but it cannot shoot well. Okay, that's my definition of archer's paradox. You can agree with me or disagree with me. That's just my one example, not my definition, but one example of archer's paradox. Okay, so I won't get into that. What I will get into is just a simple explanation of the arrow spine. And let me look at my notes one more time. Oh yeah, the purpose of knowing the spine is to try to achieve an optimal spine that'll give you the best or most efficient shooting. And if you have optimal spine, it also yields accuracy when shooting. Okay, that is the purpose. One of the purposes of knowing the characteristic of your arrow, and one of the characteristics is spine. Okay. Now, in modern terms, one useful thing, and I used it when I made this particular arrow. I made a bow first, and then I made an arrow that shoots well out of that bow, And then instead of shooting all the rest of the arrows out of that bow, I just made a bunch of shafts with the same spine and then put arrowheads on them. Okay, it's kind of a shortcut for me, and for a lot of archers that want to make a match set. You figure out one arrow. This has no tip, so I can shoot it at the target as many times as I want without breaking it. I shoot it at the target. It shoots very well. I find out what the spine is, and I can make a bunch of them without shooting. And in theory, they should all shoot well. And for the most part, they do. Well, once in a while, you get a crazy one, but for the most part, they shoot well. Okay, so I think personally, that's the biggest advantage of knowing these things in advance. All right. Now, just one more thing on spine. I'm going to do some videos on how to tune arrows, okay? And I'll be going over spine on how to tune arrows. And what I do is I shoot them without the fletching to figure out which shaft works best with a bow, and then I duplicate that shaft. I shoot it without fletching, and what I'm doing is I'm seeing if it shoots through the bow cleanly. Okay, and spine is one of the most critical things during the initial tuning or the initial determination of what arrow will shoot out of that particular bow. Okay. Alright, so instead of, without going too much more into it, like I said, I'll do another video, and I've already used all my cheat notes, but just remember, spine is a measure of deflection, and whenever I use the term spine, that's what I mean. I mean that little deflection translated into poundage on the arrow. Okay, that's it.